Thor Elptirdalr, thank you for coming. And as you say on your channel,
Välkommen allesammans. That's my intro. It just means welcome everybody. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's cool to talk on here.
yeah, no, thank you, and welcome to the archive. So you've been growing, particularly in the last year. And you also seem to be like quite a historian. So could we start with you giving an introduction as to who you are, and what your educational background is?
Yeah. So I grew up Norwegian, but and English too, actually, but grew up kind of nomad. I lived in a lot of different places. I got my bachelor's in Norway in language, and that was on the kind of study and the influence of Old Norse on the English language, because that's always been a passion of mine, of course, reading about Viking stuff and the religion since I can read, really, since I was 5. But then after that, I had a choice to make, whether I wanted to continue with the history route or do something that's actually going to make me money. So I chose that. So I went to school for international business. That was my master's degree, and that was in Germany, and finished that about 4 or 5 years ago. So that's my formal educational background, and then of course all the nerdy stuff, all the history and magic stuff. I've taught that on my own.
So you said basically since you've been able to read, was that from a family standpoint, or is that just something that someone kind of gave it to you and it just took
Yeah, I
off?
mean, and any Norwegian kid is gonna grow up that's to some extent hearing about the myths of the old gods. I mean, even before we could read, even, but bedtime stories, things like that. But yeah, they kind of hear those things and say, "Oh, cool," and then they move on with their lives. But me, I was obsessed over it, as you can tell. So yeah, it was my own choice, most of it.
You became obsessed with it, uh, and then eventually it kind of became a life pursuit and a personal practice for you. How did that? Could you share quickly how that developed?
That's I made a video about it, and I tell people this all the time. If you want to follow the old religion, the old Norse religion, it comes in 3 stages. There's the first stage where you believe all these things like a child and believe in all the gods and the myths and the Marvel like superhero characters as the religion. And then you grow up a little bit more and you start to believe, okay, maybe that's not all true. And then you become atheist. That's the second stage. But then when you reach the third stage and you start to really understand what the beliefs were about and the way nature works and how it's all related to the nature and the universe, that's when you really start to become a believer. And that was probably when I was about 20 when I made that realization. So 10 years ago, basically. And that was how it developed into practice and the rituals and trying to really look into and understand the old religion and beliefs.
All right. So would you describe kind of like in a nutshell, um, would paganism, for an audience who doesn't understand or may have never seen your channel or doesn't really know much about it, would you describe it as something that's very like scientific or very analytical based on nature and the surrounding environment and the seasons?
It's a good question. Good question. Sometimes, back in ancient times, it would have been regarded as scientific. They didn't have the modern understanding of science that we do, but they had their logic, they had their reason, and they had their perceptions, and they can look around at the world and see how things worked. And that's all that most of these old religions are. It's trying to understand and influence the different forces in nature and the universe. A lot of the times they end up being right, and we think, oh wow, this was a scientific religion, even what we know today. But a lot of the times, okay, maybe they ended up being wrong about it, but back then they would have never known that. Back then it would have been considered right because that was the only option. So that's how I look at it.
Okay. Does Norse, uh, aside from the pantheon, would you say, or is there something particular, kind of like if we're comparing salsas, there's a particular flavor that comes with the Norse practice?
Yeah, like in comparison to like the other pagan religions, you mean?
Yeah.
Hmm. So if we go back far enough, they were all the same. We're all Indo, at least in Europe, stretching all the way down to India. It's all Indo-European religion. If we go back far enough, we were all one culture, one language. If we go back 6, 7, 8,000 years, so they all developed in their own way. And definitely different flavor of salsa is a good term for it, but it's they they developed their different practices, slightly different beliefs, and they had their different names for the gods, but really they all stem from the same gods, the same practice, the same beliefs, but they just moved and evolved in different ways, depending on their culture and their nature, where their homelands are, and that's how they evolved into different belief systems like Celtic paganism, Norse paganism, Greek, Roman, all those kinds of things.
You were describing, um, that 10 years ago was kind of like the big third stage of your journey of being a practicing pagan. How has practicing that affected your life on, from a day-to-day basis to like big events, like you practicing MMA, starting up this YouTube channel?
Mm. Yeah, I wish I could. I wish I had a more glamorous story. I would be doing a lot more day-to-day practice if I was living close with nature. In Norway, I my backyard and had massive forests. Living in Los Angeles now, so not very close to nature at all, or the places where would be the right, correct historical places to do some of these practices. I mean, it's all revolved around spots in nature and ancestors, grave mounds, old burial sites, things like that. So I'm not near any of that now, so I try to do what I can pretty much. And yeah, there's 3 or 4 times a year that are the big events that I try to definitely do something on. And then yeah, that's I say it's only influenced my life in a positive way, like you were saying, in the fighting that I do, and the music. I think those things are all very spiritual, and it's helped a lot with all of that. The more I get into it, and of course now it's following my passion and making this into the YouTube channel. Now it's almost getting to the point where it can be making a living out of it. So it's yeah, really owe everything to it.
Yeah. Does it help you with living in a city environment?
Hmm. Yeah, I think the city environment deters away from it more than anything.
Okay.
Um, that's yeah, it helps me kind of. The only way I guess it helps me is it forces me to get out and get into nature and do these things that I really should be doing, that I would be doing if I was living nearby nature. I would be doing it multiple times a week, which is not
Mhm.
really possible here, but it's filming the videos and doing the practices. It kind of forces me to get out at least once every couple months. That's not much, but it helps a little bit, and then that way, that's the only way I can think about it.
Yeah. And has it helped you? Because what I hear from interviewing witches or talking to witches, or because I live near Salem, so between Salem, Mass, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, it's predominantly witches as opposed to other the pagan practices. I hear from their standpoint that their the practice itself helps them with putting more joy or putting more enthusiasm or getting into more day-to-day things that they do, like cleaning, putting a little more value into keeping their living space clean.
Mhm.
Um, are things like that, uh, are you finding it helpful for you? Like you're able to get into things more like, oh wow, when I get my coffee at Starbucks, adds maybe like a little more joy to it, or every time you make a YouTube video, or getting out of bed to go to work.
Yes, definitely not the cleaning, as you can see in my background. I'm a messy person and don't drink some Starbucks either. But yeah, it helps with my training. Just everything I turn my training and exercising into something spiritual every time. Just involving the breath work and involving the meditation and the mind. That makes it very spiritual and makes it a lot better, and more effective. And sleep, people really underestimate sleep, and that's something everyone can do. When you dream, or when you're falling asleep, those few minutes when you're on the border between falling asleep, a lot of really powerful things can come to you there, and all throughout the night when you're dreaming. And if you work on that and kind of interpret things the right way and use it in the right way, there are many techniques and things you can learn to do that. But that's something that everyone can do. And yeah, that's the only two things that I do like daily that incorporates my any spiritual beliefs and practice. So I would, for a brand new person, I would recommend those two things if they're looking at into it a bit more. I miss it. And it's like you said too, really important. You have to go out and do it. Like living near nature is going to help. But even me, with back in Norway, backyard nature, massive forest and old ancient burial sites. So I use that every day. But my neighbor, who's on the video games all day, is not experiencing any of that. So no matter, even if you live right there in these really special sacred places, even, you have to go out and explore it, or else it doesn't bring any benefit whatsoever.
All right, so let's start talking about the sources. So, at what age did you start pursuing better sources, and why?
So there are two main sources that are pretty accessible to everybody, and that's the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. And that's all the myths about the gods. That's everything that we have still on records from, they're from about the 1300s, 1200s, so a couple hundred years after the Viking Age. But those are the two sources, and they're read like storybooks, so even a kid can read those. I did that, pretty much as soon as I could start reading. Then you can get into the sagas. That's dozens of tales and thousands and thousands of pages about the Viking Age and the events that happened around that time. That's a little bit more of a tedious, boring read, but the junior high school, I started to get around those. And then as you get older, high school and college age, you can get into the academic sources and the interpretations for these types of things. That's, yeah, again, three stages to it really, but that's basically how it goes.
Yeah. Have you pursued learning the language and being able to decipher?
Yeah. I'm not good enough yet, but yeah, that is very important to do. I can understand most of it if I'm reading it there in front of me, but not can't write it or anything. That's a work in progress.
All right. Are there sources people can go to if they want to start learning the language?
Yeah. So any Old Norse books, there's a couple of them. I mean, you can kind of learn Old Norse online, and you can get Old Norse dictionaries. But the grammar is actually very difficult, so it really helps to have someone to teach you that. There are books that have that too, and there's also, I know Jackson Crawford now on YouTube has been doing some Old Norse language courses. So those have been very helpful too, because sometimes you need someone to explain the grammar because it is really complicated.
Yeah. Now, currently, like in modern times, I know that a lot of people like to disregard the sources, not just for Norse, but for anything in general. And we can see this with a TV show on the
Mhm,
History Channel.
mhm.
Um, so I'm kind of curious with the mainstream perspective that's been going on the Vikings. Has it made it harder, actually? Has it been interfering?
Yes, yes. It's like you said, this of course people should get into the sources, but it's not that easy. It's very hard. They're scattered and there's thousands and thousands of pages and you don't know where to go first, and it's really difficult to get into. So I'm not mad at anyone who has not read the sources. Of course, that's I don't expect everyone to be a nerd like me, but you should expect a little bit better from these Viking TV shows because they have some very well respected and knowledgeable historians working on the TV show, and either the historians are getting it all wrong, or either they're telling it right to the producers and directors, and the directors are just not caring what they say anyway and doing their own thing, which is fine. It's entertainment, but then you have millions of people who are going to watch that show. None of them have read the sources, and then they're going to believe it, that everything on that show is true because it's on the History Channel. So that's the problem.
Yeah. Has it been, I don't know what the pagan community where you are is like, but have you seen it have like a negative impact on both pagan and historical communities?
There's the, the cool thing about it is a lot more people have gotten into it now. I remember the times when it was, in the 2000s, and there was still not many people into these things, into the Norse religion or even into Norse history. But all of a sudden, Vikings comes out on a TV show, and now many other TV shows and movies following that. So it has just exploded. I mean, it's probably gone up 100 times more people than what were following it before over the past few decades. But yeah, people getting things wrong, of course, but they did that before too. So it's actually inspired people now to look into the actual history, whereas they get it wrong. But since like the 60s to up until maybe 10 years ago, people were kind of taking the Wicca practice and just putting these things into the Norse religion and spirituality, um, even when it's completely different from what the historical one was. So Wicca is fine if people want to practice that, but in a lot of these things we don't need to fill in the Norse historical religion with these modern practices, because we actually have records of what the original practices were like. So it's happened throughout the past 100 years probably, but I think that the modern explosion of it and the TV shows have done more good than bad, actually.
That's surprisingly good. That's not the answer I was expecting to hear.
Yeah. I think
Um,
Facebook has done more worse than anything else, because that's when all the cringe pagans get together and they just manifest their ideas, and now they think it's normal. That has done more damage than the TV
uh,
show.
so you mentioned cringe pagans. So is this what you would call like the people who, as Freya Norling would call like the plastic shamanism, the people that just turn into some kind of fashion trend?
Mm. Yeah. There's that, and there's the face paint, and there's the going around and shouting and dressing up, and the cosplayers, and all those types of things. I've done. Yeah, there's lots of little traits that they do. I've done a whole series on it. I think 10 videos now of the things they do, and I should do a lot more actually. I never run out of ideas for that.
Thor roasts cringe pagans.
Yeah.
All right. I do have to ask you, why is the Bronze Age your favorite period to study?
Yeah. It happened at different times and different cultures. The Northern European Bronze Age was quite a bit later than the Bronze Age in the Mediterranean, ancient Greek and Rome and things like that. But the Bronze Age, in my opinion, it just feels like the perfect balance of how humans were meant to be living, a perfect balance between comfort and technology, but also close enough to nature and the natural way of living that we've lived for, thousands of years. So the Viking Age was actually a time where people were losing their spirituality, losing the connection to nature, and getting civilized in big cities like that. But the Bronze Age, 1,000 years before that, 2,000 years before, they were still living in tribes, hunting, gathering, and still beautiful artwork, but enough technology and food to make life relatively comfortable, but still the close connection to nature and to the tribes and to the natural way that humans have lived for hundreds of thousands of years. So that's why it's my favorite. After a Bronze Age, the society tends
It
to go
all,
downhill
yeah,
from there.
it all goes downhill. So you mentioned before that the Bronze Age was the best period because it was when the most balanced, and then the actual Viking Age was when people started to disconnect from their religion. So could you give a little bit of information as to what was that detachment?
It's and we see it kind of in the sources and the sagas, and it's especially around the time when they're converting to Christianity, they kind of looked at the old Norse beliefs as just an inferior religion or an inferior belief system. And it's simply the fact they started to lose the understanding of it. That's what it is. And in a tribal age, it happens like this every single place in the world. When tribes are living in close connection to their spiritual leaders, each tribe, 50, 100 people, has one or two leaders there who has full understanding of the myths and the religion and the connection with nature and all the practice and things like that, why they do the things they do. But as cities start to grow bigger, it's not one person for a tribe of 50, 100 people, it's one person for a town of 1,000 people. So these real in-depth spiritual conversations become very difficult to have, and with that comes the loss of the religion. They grow up learning about it, but it's never really explained to them why they do these things, why they sacrifice the animal this way, why they walk counterclockwise 3 circles, why they do it this particular sacred place and not anywhere else. And then Christianity comes in, and it's one preacher who is very convincing and preaching to 1,000 people. So it makes people a lot more believing then. And just that that's the only option. That's why Christianity came in, and people started to believe in that a lot more. And that happens everywhere when a civilization go from small villages to big cities.
Yeah. So with these smaller communities, are you finding within your studies that people need more time to learn all of these different myths and beliefs?
Absolutely, absolutely. Even me, I don't know everything, and even with all the many hundreds of hours of videos I've made, it's there's still lots of missing pieces that we don't understand. And each little subject, a myth that can be told in 30 seconds, you can go on for 2 hours explaining it and interpreting it. And yeah, Christianity is not like that. It's a lot easier to explain the beliefs in a way that most people will understand.
There was, speaking of which, there was a book you once mentioned that you said 9 pages were missing from
Hmm.
that supposedly explains everything. Um, has there been any leads from that?
Hmm.
Has anyone been able to discover anything else or make any potential assumptions?
They're gone. They're gone. So that's the Poetic Edda, or the Codex Regius as they call it. And what that is the compilation of poems and texts. It was written in about the 1200s, but because of the language and structure and style and poetical meter, all those kinds of things, we know that most of those were written in pagan times, and those were the exact poems that the pagans were telling each other. That was hidden away. Actually, it was written in about the 1200s in Iceland. It was hidden away for about 400 years. because they knew it would be destroyed if people found it. They found it on a farm in the 1600s, and they took it out and they sent it to the King of Denmark as a gift. And by the time it got there, 9 pages were torn out of it. So I wonder what those 9 pages were. Could be exactly the thing that was missing that connects it all together. So something was in there that made the people feel like they needed to tear that out. So that's all we know about that. But it's just my theories of what could be in there.
That totally sucks. What is your theory actually on what could be in there?
It could be a couple missing poems, just as simple as that, or it could be what I think, if it was that important to be ripped out, it could be something that makes sense of the whole thing. It could have been kind of like a table of contents or a glossary telling what everything means, or it could be, a step-by-step guide or tutorial. This is what this means, this is what this means, this is why we do this ritual, this is where it ties into that. Yeah, who knows? That's my ideas, but it's no way to know for sure.
Yeah. So you also, funny enough, uh, make connections to different religions and cultures like Hinduism. Has anyone been able to discover, or have you been able to discover anything else or find commonalities by studying other religions or cultures?
Yeah, definitely. They're the same religion if we go back far enough in time. It's any Indo-European religion is the same if we go back far enough. So of course they evolved separately for 8,000 years, so they're going to be very different. But there are certain things that the Norse sources are missing that we don't have, but then we can fill in the blank in other religions in the world. If we find the missing pieces in any Indo-European religion, then that's great, because that would be the closest, that would be most likely. But I even looked at Native American spirituality, or Pacific spirituality, or even African spirituality sometimes, to just fill in some of the blanks that we don't have in the Norse sources. And there's good chance that a lot of that is correct.
Okay. Are you able to give, if not like the Norse, the best possible elevator pitch on the religion, are you able to give the closest Indo-European the elevator pitch on what that religion is for people who don't know?
Hinduism would be, it's the closest still surviving uninterrupted religion that's related to the Norse. Yeah, what do you say? Elevator pitch about the Norse religion, or how they kind of
Yeah, just
all
kind of a
relate?
quick elevator pitch, just so like people who are watching this who've never, seen your videos or heard of you or have heard or really looked into the Norse stuff. That way they just kind of get a little bit of an idea as to what it's about.
I would say the people you see in the West now looking into the spirituality of the East, whether that be Buddhism or Hinduism, or even if it's just people doing yoga and meditation and those types of things, the quickest elevator pitch and way to reach a lot of those people mostly is you have the exact same spirituality in your homeland and your home. If you're European, if you're in basically your ancestral homeland, we don't have sources of exactly what it was like, but it's essentially the same religion, and you will get the same meaning out of it if these people are already looking into Eastern beliefs. And that's what I like to say, because you're not going to win over the European people who are just not interested in it at all, who are not interested in any spirituality at all. But the ones who are interested in spirituality and looking for some of those answers and philosophies, then you can just direct them to their own religion of their homelands, and that makes a lot of people happy.
Thank you, Thor. Now, now you're an MMA fighter, and then you have this store. Um, and eventually, you've said that one of your goals is to have your own village.
Mhm.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's looking a lot closer than I thought, actually. Just escaping the modern life and society the way it's set up now, and living in a way that's we're not trying to go back 1,000 years and live like Vikings in the village, but we're trying to take the things that are good about modern technology and leave the things that are damaging to us. So I mean, we can all move out to the country, buy some land and start owning chickens and grow your own vegetables and fruits and things like that. But it really needs to be done, if you want to do it the proper way and do it sustainably. It needs to be done with a group of people, like-minded people like yourself, form a tribe, and I think that's the best way to live, really. And then you can kind of pick and choose the aspects of history, ancient history that you want to take, and pick the aspects of modern technology that you want to take. So that's my whole plan with that.
All right. So hopefully maybe preserve a little history, walking history. And
Yeah, and recreating it too. Like kind of what you said. It's a lot of these things, these old ideas that are lost, and these old discoveries. They're not. We can find them maybe by living like they did back then, or even speaking the same language, or doing the same things, and that can kind of bring some life back into it, and open our eyes to some of the lost mysteries.
yeah, would the ancient people have just taken advantage of what was good with technology? Do you think they would have thought of that, or do you think they would have rejected it or played around with it more?
I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult. Of course, that we all agree that we should take the new technology that benefits us, but ignore the new technology that damages us. We know that cell phones are a good invention, but spending 10 hours a day scrolling your phone, that is not a good idea. I think ancient humans would have done the same thing as us, but they would have just been a little bit better at realizing when technology becomes a detriment to when it becomes beneficial.
Yeah. Do you think that's because they might have been encouraged to go operate on their own more compared
Mm,
to nowadays, where it's just handed to you and you're like, all right, here, take it. This is what you use now.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely, and yeah, they were more centered around tradition, and they had a better understanding of the natural human way of life that we've kind of lost today. Um, so that's the main difference. But I'm sure there would still be plenty of people back then who would take every chance and just fall victim to the trap of scrolling on their phone all day. But in general, I think they would be a bit better at it than we are today.
Okay. And then lastly, before I ask you if you've got a message for anybody out there, Sami people come up from time to time with Norse. Were they connected at all?
Yeah, yeah,
Did they have
definitely,
an
definitely.
importance? Were they seen as like the wise people that live in the woods? Were they their neighbors?
What I told you about the Bronze Age and how the Viking Age in Scandinavia, they were kind of losing their belief system and native spirituality. The Sami had full understanding of it still, and they still had kind of the tribal Bronze Age or before understanding of their belief system and nature too. So the Norse looked to the Sami all the time for spiritual help, for divination, for healing, for magic, for all these things. There was even a term called Finnföd, which means go travel to the land of the Finns. So it was like a vacation that they would take, and a word in their language that they had to refer to going to seeing the Finns or the Sami to get spiritual help or get power or things like that. It's because they still knew how these rituals all worked, and how nature functioned and how to benefit from it. So that's very closely connected. Even though they did have their quarrels, it wasn't all positive. They fought too, but in general, they were respected and looked up to.
Okay, really, really cool. Are there still practicing Samis? today?
It's there. I don't know enough about it. There are people that say they are.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how much I believe that. Like, they practice it very long up until the 1800s, late 1800s even. There were still plenty of Sami practicing their native tradition and spirituality, even though the religion was still very illegal. They were confiscating these religious instruments from the Sami then. So it lasted almost 1,000 years. Their pagan beliefs lasted almost 1,000 years longer than in the Norse tradition, but it's been interrupted now for a little over 100 years. I think there's definitely people who have been practicing it in private from then, and then there's a lot of people claiming that they know and that it's an uninterrupted belief system and religion, but I think there are actually a few people who do really know, and are continuing their oldest beliefs. So but I've never visited them. I can't say much about that, but I will for sure sometime in the future.
Yeah. Future video.
Yeah, for
Thor
sure.
goes on vacation to Sami land.
Yeah, Finford. That's a good idea.
Finford. Yeah, that'd be kind of funny.
Yeah.
Resort video. Come see Finford. You will. You will be spiritually awakened.
Yeah.
All right. So my last question is: do you have any messages for future generations, historians, people who research history, Norse?
And messages. Yeah, for up with my messages, don't focus your whole life on it. As much as I love it, I'm glad that I didn't go down that route for education, because it would end up in a lot of debt and not making a lot of money from it. And then even when you are teaching at university, it's not subjects that people are that interested in, so it's not that good. I would rather recommend people get into it on their own free time, and have more people do that, because that's when it can really spread, and then more people can start making videos like mine and reach way more people. That's just advice I would give to anyone interested in history or the old religions, just to make life easier on yourself, and that would bring more benefit to others as well.
All right. Thank you, Thor.
Yeah, thank you for having me. That's a good talk.